Welcome to the Robert and Francis Fullerton Museum of Art's Art Hour podcast, the show where we talk about art, history, and everything in between. I'm your host, Lana Klaib, and today I am joined by Chase Hanson and Daniel Escamilla. So thank you guys for joining me. I'm just some quick introductions. So you guys should all recognize Chase. He's been on here a few times. So we have Chase Hanson. He is a RAFFMA Student Assistant, a studio art and art history double major with a minor in art in history, and he specializes in ceramics. And we also have Dan. Dan is also a student assistant, so today we have like the pantheon of student assistants. He is our photographer and videographer. He is working on his Bachelor of Fine Arts, and he specializes in photography. Yeah. So thank you guys both so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Having both of you guys on. This is actually Dan's first time, which is super exciting.
Yeah, it is.
We tried in the past having you on, and it never worked.
We have, and it's not been once. It's been
multiple times.
Multiple times. I didn't realize that was the first time.
This is the first time. So welcome, Dan, and
Thank you.
Welcome back, Chase. So today we are going to be talking about wacky art history. I think we can all agree. I mean, Chase could probably talk more about this, but the past has always been an interesting place. And art has always been an interesting thing to study. So when you combine them both, you get some really weird stuff.
Yes.
So I have some interesting stories that I pulled. And so we're just going to kind of talk about them, react to them, and see what we think.
All right.
Sweet. So first we have the artist Christophe Klimt. He painted The Kiss, and we were talking about this earlier, Dan. Yes. It's a very nice painting. He's a very prominent late 19th, early 20th century painter. And, you know, we're all here practicing artists to some extent. I do painting, ceramics, and then photography. So we all kind of are familiar with, you know, creating something and creating it to last. Right. You know, there's different things that we do to make things last longer.
Yeah.
Some things work better than others.
Yes.
Klimt had his own way of doing this. He used cat urine as a fixative.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
One would think, how do you
experimental
get to that?
Isn't that the opposite of everything you'd ever want to normally put on a painting?
Yeah, especially because, like, to this day, I believe that some of his paintings are slowly being destroyed.
Yeah. Yes, because of it. Yeah.
Because of it.
Yeah,
and, you know, artist story is interesting, and yeah, that's something I found online. I'm like, why would you, like, of all things?
Right, like, it's definitely very experimental, very he's kind of trying to be creative, not just with his concepts, but with the mediums that he's working in. Now, to be creative using, like, you know, byproduct of an organism, you know, like urine and all that stuff. Like I said, very interesting, but yeah, definitely very acidic.
Acidic,
you know, so that definitely led to the degradation of the works.
Slowly corroding paintings away,
unfortunately. Yes, unfortunately, because, yes, The Kiss, I'm not sure if that was one of the artworks that was made with the urine, but just The Kiss alone is a beautiful piece of work. It only makes me wonder the pieces of works that he did use the urine in, and just kind of curious to know what it would look like.
And I'm curious to know if it smells.
Yes, definitely. I'm sure it did.
It's a process I think I would have had a second thought about, like maybe a day or two after the treatment.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Cool. So that was the little short one that we could start with, kind of get us warmed up.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, you're another painting. Fun. So next, we're going to talk about an artist, Chris Burden. I personally haven't heard much about his art, but there's one that most people are familiar with, I think. I just didn't know it was him. Outside of the LA County Museum of Art, I think that's the full name of it, LACMA, there's this whole display of these street lamps.
Yes, correct.
That's him, Chris Burden. Okay. And I feel like everyone has, you know, done an Instagram post there.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, he's a contemporary painter. Not a painter, I guess an artist. He does a lot of different things. And he's definitely calmed down the last few years, but in his early days of creating art, he was very performative, to the point where it's causing self-harm. So I'll give some examples. I guess we can kind of talk about it. The first thing, well, one of the things that he did was he was stranded on an island for 11 days with no food.
Okay.
Another thing he did is he had a friend of his shoot him in the arm, and he called the piece "Shoot." He also nailed himself to a Volkswagen. And this is the one I found most interesting. This is the one I asked like fully look up further to be like, whoa, what happened?
Yeah.
It was called Prelude to 220 or 220. So it's Prelude to 220, comma, or 110. So basically what he did is he was hooked up to a bunch of copper wires, which were then hooked up to a 110-volt battery inside a gallery, and next to him was 2 buckets of water. Now, if we know anything about electricity and waters, they don't mix. So basically,
Right.
if at any point, and like this was an open gallery, people walking in and out, if at any point someone spilled the 2 buckets, he would have been electrocuted to death. So that was his work, and I guess it kind of raises the question of what extent are artists willing to go for their work. So what do you guys think about that?
Right.
We justify a lot. We say that a lot is acceptable in the pursuit of art, as long as it doesn't hurt other people. A lot of the time is our watchword, and then, well, we get a case and we suddenly start to rethink those convictions.
Right.
Right. I mean, similar to what Chase said. Excuse me. As long as it doesn't cause any harm or impose on anyone's rights, human dignity, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it's almost like self-flagellation, right?
Mm-hmm.
I read up on the shooting, and it was interesting. He spoke about it in an interview, and it's an interesting quote that he had said. And now, the shooting was done in 1971, so that's kind of important to what I'm about to say. He said I don't know if it's going to be verbatim from what I recall, which I read at artnet.com or .org, that getting shot as an American, like getting shot is just as American as apple pie. So I thought that was very interesting, considering where the world was at, or where America socially was at during when that was performed, which is 1971. You have the Vietnam War.
Right.
You have sentiments against that. So that's kind of where my thought process kind of went, which I was like, whoa, that's interesting. Like, wow, so it's like, I mean, truth be told, you join the military, you protect the Constitution, which definitely thank you, for those that do make that choice, because they're making a choice to protect our Constitution, protect our democracy, but at the same time, whether they agree with the war or not, unfortunately, they have to be a soldier. So as a one of them, you could find negative sentiments towards it. So I'm curious to know if that's maybe what he was trying to kind of pinpoint, or try to kind of address in his work or in that specific work. And then he followed up with, he had also talked about it within that same article that I was reading, that he also wanted to know how it felt to be shot, which he was shot with a .22. So I mean, it's relatively small, but still you're being shot
in the arm, yeah.
Exactly. So definitely a very extreme way to produce work. I don't think there's a right or wrong way. I think it's very interesting when he made that quote about apple pie and stuff. It's kind of made me think. And also the one where he electrocuted was pretty interesting in itself when you think about it, because it's like he's almost inviting and saying it's okay for you to pretty much electrocute me. Right. So it's almost like
a challenge, I think, to the audience.
Is to the audience, which is the public, which is
and putting trust in the public too.
Exactly, putting trust in the public and the people, which where my mind was going. I was like, wow, like if someone were to have spilled that water, because we know that it didn't happen because he's still alive and he doesn't have any electrocution injuries or whatever. But it would have been interesting. What would that have said about society if someone did do that? Someone did go in there and then simply walk away without any consideration of the human dignity, human life, So that's an interesting one, and that's an interesting performance that he did. Thankfully, the people that were there had sense to not do it. But yeah, I wonder what that would have said. if it was done, what it said about society as a whole.
That's a very, very popular running theme in performance art, especially. The class example is always the cut pieces by Yoko Ono, where kind of trust in the public is always something that artists are incredibly, incredibly interested in exploring, and not just exploring how the public is interacting with artists and art, but kind of asking them, how can you interact with it? Are you willing to really, really explore all your options or not? And the thing is, we don't necessarily hear or see or think about the ones that are asking anything less than the most extreme amounts of trust from the audience. When we hear about these pieces, it's always right to the guy who's putting his own electrical death on the line. That kind of shows why they do these pieces. This is, if they're trying to push the boundary, and we eventually hear about it when things have gone a little bit too far, it sounds like it found the boundary. It sounds like it found it exactly at that line where we say it's okay for the public to come up and start cutting clothes off of a woman's body, but when there's death at risk and not just humiliation to the woman, then maybe we should rethink things.
Right.
Yeah, and considering that artists are very conceptual, you're thinking, well, some artists can be very conceptual, some artists may be more minimalistic and just concerned about the form, composition, the technicality of it. But going to the ones that are kind of more conceptual, that are that their work is more focused on the perception, that their self-perception of the society that they're around, that's kind of an interesting thought in itself. That's where I was kind of thinking with all that. Yeah.
So my question, I guess, is we talked about that line, that boundary, and getting as close to that boundary as you can without crossing it. Is there actually a boundary line? And if so, what is it? Like, is art suddenly too far if, like, let's say an artist does die for the sake of their art, or is that's what they wanted and we need to respect that?
Artists are definitely conceptual, very conceptual.
This art piece of being shot or having your death on the line isn't like a one-off thing. This is performance art that's done in places and by artists and in times across the world over and over and over. And it's clear that I don't think anybody has decided that boundary. There's nowhere near a consensus with this kind of thing. Some places you get laughed out of the building. Some places the cops will roll up on you, and some places you'll pull the entire performance off without a hitch. The way society and people react to it can be very, very, very different.
I wonder, performances such as what Chris Burden, hopefully I'm not pronouncing it wrong, Burden, I think are made to, once again, kind of critique society, to see where society is at as a whole, to address certain issues. It's interesting. I'm still thinking about his other performance. I believe it's called Transfixed, where he's in a crucified manner, or in a crucified
Pose.
Thank you. I mean, he literally, as it says in the article, he crucifies himself to the Volkswagen, so he nails himself to the Volkswagen, just like Jesus. And he considers the Volkswagen to be part of the people. And I forgot where I read this. But that's interesting in itself. Like the article was mentioning that he saw him as like kind of liberating the people from society, or some type of liberation, almost similar like how Jesus did on the cross, with opening up the gates and yada yada yada. So that's an interesting concept in itself, which I'm still thinking about it, still trying to wrap my brain around. But once again, I think it's all just simply the perception of society, seeing it, and trying to address these concerns.
Cool. So I'm going to move on to the next story. This is another, I think it's going to be a quick one. This happened in 1990 in Boston, so fairly recently. There was this art museum. What's special about this museum is that in 1990, the world's largest art heist happened, where it was $500 million worth of art was stolen from the museum. And what's crazy is that to this day, no one knows where the pieces are or who did it. There's no leads. no nothing, and there's still a reward for any information that can lead to the piece. And it's funny because well, not the piece, for the pieces. And it's funny because the reward is for $10 million, but it was $500 million worth of stuff that was stolen. So I find the reward amount funny. I mean, granted, it's something small you're doing, saying like, hey, I saw this guy take a fade into his car, and then bam, $10 million. But yeah.
The hope that they're gambling on, at least, though, is that you would take a 10 million that you're more or less guaranteed over the 500 million that you can't sell to anybody, because everybody knows that 500 million is not a small amount of art. Every single museum in the world is going to know about all of those paintings and what they look like and where they should be. And so if nobody has caught a sniff of this hoard until now, they are locked in a safe somewhere because they can't be gotten rid of. They can't be sold like that, at least not in any public manner where people would know about it.
True. I think this would also kind of bring it apart now, quote unquote, maybe not normal channels of selling an artwork, more
black market.
Exactly. Didn't want to use the term, but yes, that term. The black market, right? I think there is a potential, some type of lucrative opportunity there. That's more than 10 mil. Once again, 10 mil is a lot. But cost of living is quite a lot too. But yes, actually, that's interesting that I was reading up on this one as well. And yeah, I mean, the FBI doesn't know. It's like even in the 90s, which is, I mean, we're not in the 80s, we're not in the 70s, so technology has advanced at that point, and obviously is continuing to advance because now we're where we're at in the current time. So it's like, even with the advancement of these technologies to solve crimes and yada yada, we still have not been able to solve this. And just like Chase says, it is correct. They do have a list that is known, and you got some Rembrandts, you got Vermeer that's on there, so yeah.
Like these are
legit,
big pieces of work.
Yes, so it's crazy to even think like, how the heck did this happen? If I remember correctly, I want to say that they posed as security officers or law enforcement.
That's how they did it?
I think. I didn't completely finish reading the article, and I got to that far, so I wasn't completely done with it. But however they did it, it's just crazy that they were to pull this off during the 90s. During we're now starting to have computers booming up, which I mean they were kind of there prior, but not as advanced as they were in the 90s.
Right, and it's crazy because when you think about art heists like this, it happened. I mean, not in my lifetime, but in many people's lifetime. This is only the 90s. This was 30 years ago.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, less than 100 years ago.
We trust museums and archives so much because those are museums and archives. Those are the places where we put stuff to be safe. So it's very, very ontologically scary sometimes when we remember that any security is just buying time before the inevitable. Any fire suppression is 90% effective. Any humidity control will eventually be sucked up with water. Kind of these spaces that we label the most trustworthy places might be bad. They might be the most trustworthy places, but they are not perfectly trustworthy.
Right.
And so we do have to keep an eye on our museums and archives sometimes.
Yeah, I agree. Especially since, obviously the purpose of the museum is to keep these things safe, keep these things in a certain condition so that future generations can enjoy them. Because they're beautiful pieces. I mean, obviously we have images of them, photographs, film. And they're beautiful, So it almost, like I said, once again, it just kind of makes me think about how these guys were able to do it, considering all the factors that the museum goes through, So that's pretty wild. They pulled it off. It seems like a Hollywood,
like Ocean's 11.
Yeah, like Ocean's 11 or the bank job or something. It's just, they pulled it off. I mean, wow.
Right. Okay. So moving on to the next story. I think we all know about Van Gogh. Very popular painter, I'd say. Not in his lifetime, though. I mean, everyone knows him, Starry Night, sunflowers, the whole thing. Many people know that he was a troubled artist, struggled with mental health. One thing that is interesting is that we all know that how he died. He was shot, died 2 days later of his injuries. And for many years, at the time of his death and then many years after, it was pretty much well accepted that he committed suicide. So he shot himself and then died a few days later from his injuries. What's interesting, though, is that in 2011, two art historians, they're American writers, theorized that he didn't commit suicide. It was actually murder. And they make a really interesting case. So I'm going to kind of go over the facts of the case with you guys, and we'll see which way you guys think happens. So, like I said, he was known to be mentally unstable. He had committed self-harm in the past. You know, when people think of Van Gogh, they think the guy with one ear. So it's not out there to think that he would have caused more self-harm to the point of death. So what happened on the specific day, I believe it was in July of 1890, I believe. So he would go out, so he was staying at this inn at the time, and he would go out every day for a walk. So it was his routine. One day he went out for his walk, and he just didn't come back. And so obviously the innkeepers were worried about him. He always comes back at this time. He's back. He ended up coming back late with a shot in the chest. And then he ended up dying 2 days later from this shot. So he told everyone that he did it himself. He shot himself. So what happened in 2011, though, is that, well, this is when the writing came out, but like I said, Van Gogh was troubled, not only from his own mental health, but also from society. So it was known that there was this group of teenage boys that would bully and, you know, just terrorize him, basically. And one of these boys was later interviewed years later when this guy who was teen boy at the time, at the end of his days, when he was towards the end of his life, he was interviewed. And he admitted that they would bully Van Gogh. He said that he even brandished a gun at him at one point, dressed as Buffalo Bill. But not that the gun was dressed as Buffalo Bill, but he was dressed as Buffalo Bill. So the writers claimed that these boys were probably messing with him as they did in the past, and they admitted to doing. There was maybe a misfire, something happened, he was shot in the chest, and then everyone knows that he was open to self-harm, not open to self-harm, but he was prone to self-harm.
And he didn't want to point the finger at the kids.
He didn't want to point the finger at the kid, so he took the blame for it so the kids could go, you know, scot-free, and then everything would be put to rest. So that's kind of the story. Also in, I believe it was the 70s is when they found the weapon.
Okay.
They believe, there's no way to tell for certain, but they
Right.
basically found this gun that matched the wound that he had in the fields right next to the inn where he used to take his walks, and he was laying there, and there's, I don't know if it's carbon dating, but there's a way that they could tell that it's been there since about 1890 and it hasn't moved. So we have chest wounds, we have gun in the fields, boys who admitted to teasing him with guns,
Yes.
but we also have the artist saying he did it himself. Any thoughts?
Yes. That's pretty wild. First off, that's pretty cool, assuming that the boy that they interviewed is who he says he is, that they were able to reach out. Now, any thoughts on specifically whether he did it himself or not? You know, obviously one thought is it's kind of a weird way to commit suicide, right? Shooting in the chest versus, you know, I would imagine, and maybe there's some statistics about this, but I would imagine, right, you're at the bottom of the barrel and your mind, and you want a quick exit out. So a chest wound isn't really that quick when you consider the brain.
Right, and especially because he was suffering in pain for 2 days.
Yeah.
It wasn't a quick death by any means. It was,
No.
you know, slow and painful. So why shoot himself in the chest?
Right.
It's a weird place.
Yeah.
Yes,
to
it
shoot
is.
yourself.
And I was trying to find perspectives on through the like the health world at that time of what their perspective was. Did they believe that the brain was better than the heart, or was more important than the heart, or did they believe that the heart was more important than the brain? Unfortunately, I wasn't able to find the answer in time. I did find an article, but I wasn't able to read it, so I scratched that. But my next thought did go to the boys. I mean, they were as an artist, right? I value human dignity. I value human life. And that's my perspective. Van Gogh could have had a similar perspective, right?
Mhm.
It was a mistake. Maybe it wouldn't have happened. Maybe they're playing around. Kids can be kids. And so it accidentally went off. And I could see him, assuming that he is that kind of person, I could see him kind of taking the blame for it.
Especially because everyone thought, like, it's not out of the question for him to do this.
Yeah.
Right.
It was already on people's minds. And,
Right.
I believe that he was already in a mental asylum or a mental institution up until May of that year.
Right.
And he was saying, like, the institution wasn't good. So he left to stay at this inn. Granted, he said that he was doing better
Mm-hmm.
at the inn. He said that things were kind of looking up. And I believe that morning of, he did write, a kind of cheery sounding letter to his brother.
Okay.
So that's interesting. It's like, it seems like
Yes.
he was kind of, getting a hold on things finally.
Right.
And then he goes and gets shot.
Right.
So,
Somehow gets a gunshot wound. What's also interesting is that correspondence between him and his brother, in which I believe occurred prior to the one that you were talking about, the uplifting letter written. But the correspondence that I'm recalling is, if I recall, a couple of years before, maybe, in which he states to his brother that, I have X amount of years to live. And I believe it's 7 to 10, which is interesting. And if I recall correctly, I would like to quote the source, but I don't remember the source.
we were looking at this together,
Yes.
I think, where it was
Yes.
7 years before, he told his brother,
Right.
I think I have about
Yes.
7 to 10 years left of working. And then almost on the dot, 7 years later, he's shot.
So I think that could contradict the idea
Mhm.
that it wasn't suicide. Just because it's like, dang, he's like called it on the dot. How could he call it on the dot and it be an accident?
Mhm.
But at the same time, could be coincidence.
Right.
I mean, he was tormented by these boys. Sounds like almost daily. I don't know how familiar you are with Avatar: The Last Airbender, but there's
Yeah.
a scenario that pops up in there where they go see this lady and she's a mystic. She foresees things, and so one of the things she tells one of the person is, "Oh yeah, you wear your red shoes. You're gonna meet the love of your life wearing your red shoes."
Mhm.
So then the character is always wearing the red shoes.
Yeah.
So another character comes by the name of Sokka, and he's all like, points out these things, and the guy's like, "Oh yeah, she told me to meet my love, wearing the red shoes. So every single day he wears the red shoes. So eventually it's gonna happen."
Right.
You know what I mean? So I guess
It's
what
like
I'm trying
a
to say,
self-fulfilling prophecy, making it inevitable
Right.
that it's fulfilled.
right? I guess my point is because this guy did it on a daily basis, just like Van Gogh got tormented by these boys on a daily basis.
Mhm.
I could see that accidentally happening to him, to be coincidence, to coincide with that letter,
Mhm.
So it's a little food for thought. That's where my thought went.
Right. Any thoughts, Chase?
I think he covered it.
Are you leaning towards he did it himself, or was it an
There's-
accident that was
yeah,
covered
There's
up?
a lot of worrying factors there, and I think there's probably a lot of good reasons why they didn't follow up too much, why they weren't really picking into these boys to see if they did it. If
Mhm.
that gun sat there in the field for 100 years, nobody looks for it.
Right.
And it just sounds like a bad situation to me.
Mhm.
Yeah. I mean, that's why the gun even sat there,
Right. Just
and that
in the
they-
field.
Yeah, in the fields, and that they were able to date it for as far as they did.
I believe it recently sold in auction too. The gun.
Dang it, that's kind of, excuse me, do you remember the amount?
I believe. Let's see. Do I have it here? I think it was in. It was definitely in the thousands. Like it was, a substantial amount.
And that's crazy. Like, oh man, that's kind of wild just because it's like, it's not even confirmed, right? I mean, any gun could be
Yeah.
from 1890,
Mhm.
right?
It's just a dusty old gun from a field.
Exactly.
Right.
Any gun could be from 1890. Any gun could. It's almost like, okay, well, is that a coincidence that it was in the same field in which he generally would go visit? You
Mhm.
kind of have that's kind of a good point. Yeah, but it's just kind of wild. Like it's sold for that without any real confirmation other than speculations.
Right.
You know, so
I mean, it matches up to everything, but there's no way to confirm
exactly.
that this is one. I mean, guns don't generally have like their own, I guess, fingerprints to say like this is the one.
And especially if it's been corroded to that far. I mean,
Right. It's all rusted.
Today they might, but
Today they might,
not
not
100 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, these are just like mass produced.
Exactly, where you're firing a
Oh,
lead
true.
ball.
Yeah.
You're not going to fingerprint it to the gun.
Dang. Actually, that's interesting because if it's a specialized gun, you have a point there. Huh.
Yeah, but before 1900, it wouldn't have been any kind of specialized
Yeah.
ammunition.
Sweet. So we can go on to the next story. It's only right before we were like as we were getting setting up for everything. We did mention we were talking about Salvador Dali. I think.
Okay, yeah, we
That's
were.
what we were talking about.
The surrealist film,
Right.
Chateau something. I forget.
Right, the one. It's the eye one. The
Yeah,
one with
it's
just
where
the
the guy
eye.
gets
Yeah.
the ants from
So
the hand.
we talked about Salvador Dali was a very interesting person. He did everything for the shock. One thing I didn't know about him personally is that he was of the belief that he was a reincarnation of his older brother.
Wow.
Since he was a child, he believed this. Reason
Okay.
being is that his brother died 9 months before Dali was born.
Uh-huh.
His name was Salvador, so his parents named Salvador Dali after his older brother.
Okay.
And when Salvador Dali, the not dead brother one, when he was of the age of 5, parents took him to see, his older brother's grave, and the parents told him that he was the reincarnation of his older brother, and so he held this belief for years.
Dang.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, can you believe, being told like, hey, you are your dead brother?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
I would say maybe. Maybe.
right. I think being named after his brother isn't necessarily that bad, right? Because, sometimes people name after their grandparents or whatnot, right? What? Being told that at age of 5?
Mhm.
Like, you gotta consider the idea, like, how that impacted his mental state.
Mhm.
I mean, first off, how beautiful is that for a surrealist artist to come up from that life? Like, that in itself is like surreal.
Right.
Like he was
It's like
literally
his whole
living
entire
it. Yes.
presence and being was surrealism.
Yes. So I mean, that's kind of.
Exactly.
I mean, it's almost like, dang, no wonder why he's a surrealist artist. No wonder why he's producing what he was producing. I mean, if he held this belief that he was a reincarnated of his brother, then his thoughts are his thoughts. Is his individuality his? It's like, wow.
It's a real good backstory for a surrealist artist, isn't it?
Yeah,
It really
so
makes you. It just
beautiful.
makes you want to like find out how could somebody who like basically is a surrealist artwork already like find his way into a career of making
Yes.
surrealist artwork.
Yes, like wow.
It's almost like
Yes.
somebody like designed
That's
him
true.
to be like the perfect surrealist
That's
artist.
true. I
So,
agree with that.
I already kind of spoiled my opinion on this earlier already, but you don't consider too much offhand about him. You don't think too much deeper, but isn't the point of surrealism that you're subverting and defying expectations as hard as possible? You're trying to go against convention by being weird. That's a
Yes.
central element of surrealism is weirdness. It has to be as non-conventional, non-normal as possible.
Yes.
And Dali leaned into this. Dali was an enormous shock jockey. Everything he did in all of his work. Like, what was the point of the ready-mades? We talk about how famous he is for taking that bold leap to rethink the museum, rethink the artwork, and put a urinal in there. Or I'm sorry, that was Duchamp. But
Yeah, but he did. Was he the one
but-
with Dolly that made the lobster phone?
lobster phone. Yeah.
Lobster phone, I think.
I don't recall.
But like those surrealists, those non-normal elements, they're all, in a word, contrarianism, right?
Mhm.
You're taking everything normal and expected and just doing the exact opposite of it because that's weird and because that, frankly, gets attention.
Right.
Yeah, correct. I definitely agree with that.
And so to take a very, very cynical, but not too much of a leap of logic view on it, I'm sure he told people that he has this great surrealist origin story,
Yeah.
and I'm sure that sold very, very well.
Right.
Huh.
Whether or not his parents actually told this story to him is
Yeah.
frankly irrelevant. It doesn't really matter. His backstory, as far as we're concerned, is that he is this mysterious, arcane, mystical figure
Right.
who channels all these otherworldly dream energies into the
Mhm.
surrealist
So
expressions.
potentially this could be a fabrication to play into him being a surrealist
A-
artist,
a
the
lot of his
ambiance
work-
of his character.
A lot of his work was kind of talked up.
Hmm.
He definitely would kind of portray things as a little bit more authentic and a little bit more not an artwork made up for the spot than they really were.
Right.
Dang,
Because you do have to remember that he is a public performer.
true.
He's not just an artist
What a
making
greater
things.
way-
This guy is a
Exactly. Yep.
character. He's a performer. He wears a goofy mustache and goofy clothes and dances around on stage and talking in funny voices.
So he's used to being a different character.
Exactly.
I could relate
So
to
it's-
that.
And this is just one backstory. Like, I've heard other Salvador Dali backstories that give him even crazier mystical attributes.
Uh-huh.
I'm not surprised that this is a story about him.
Okay, crazy.
Yeah.
So this is a story that he said. Is that correct?
I don't know where the source came
Okay.
from. I do think that, older brother was named Salvador Dali.
I'm sure he had a brother. I'm
Yeah,
sure
I
these
know.
facts line up, and I'm sure he stopped and looked at it and went, if I connect a couple dots here, this sounds a lot more interesting than it is.
Dang, it's
Right.
almost like a ingenious marketing of the self, yo. 'Cause
I mean, that's what he was doing. He created a
Right.
caricature for himself
dang.
and, advertised himself as that.
I've said it before, all artists are entrepreneurs. Everybody's trying to sell
Yep.
themselves.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's very true. But I mean, something like that is kind of more, selling yourself as an artist, selling your work. Oh, I'm a photographer. How do you sell yourself as a photographer? How does Salvador Dali sell himself as a new invention? As a surreal artist. Once again, it's just kind of like this is the perfect background story to a surreal artist. It's like so perfect. It's so beautiful. So poetic that it's kind of like raises kind of flags like, wait, this is too perfect. So
Right.
potentially of it being half truth, I could see it being like that. But if it's like 100% truth, that everything's factual, that really did happen, his parents really did tell him that, this once again, kind of like a beauty behind that, like, damn, that's an authentic surrealist artist,
On a random note, he also, I guess it was an art piece of his, he drove around in a car full of cauliflower.
Wait, I'm sorry.
Completely random.
Say that one more time again?
As an art piece, like a performative piece, he drove around in a car full of cauliflower.
What color was the car?
I don't know. I didn't check.
Okay, I'm just trying to get as much information to kind of try to
I'm just trying to
right,
imagine
considering
like
color
this
theory
date.
and if it may have like some type of theme to it. But yeah, driving
It's a
around with
logical
cauliflower,
question.
Yeah,
That's not the
right?
question I'm asking.
What do you,
I'm
yeah,
asking,
what's
like,
in
where
your
did the
head?
where did the cauliflower come from?
I know.
How much did the
right?
cauliflower
Like,
cost? I'm not asking what color
okay.
is the car.
I'm totally trying to give like some logical theme to it, but maybe that's it because he's a surrealist.
I mean,
Maybe
I
logic has to
think
be thrown out.
Part
Like,
of
why?
the point of surrealism is that there is no logic. Like oftentimes in the art world, we try to come up with this deep analysis. I want to say like
True.
almost like Freudian analysis
Yeah,
of
yeah,
art
we-
pieces, and surrealist was completely against that in a lot of ways. So
I think it was just more for like the act of the emotion. Shock. That is shocking.
That's the point of surrealism, is that it takes that established tradition in Western scholarship and I don't know the adjective form of academy. Academics. Yeah. I'm a little sleepy today. The whole Western academics is so focused on this idea of it doesn't, even if the artist like doesn't have their thoughts on it, you just make up the artist's thoughts for them and say that
Sure.
they just didn't know it at the time.
right.
And yeah, surrealism takes that contrarian view to it. They're saying, what if that Dadaist, that's where I'm getting it confused, Dadaism, they want to say, no, we don't want this intentional logic, or we want this alternate logic.
Do you think it was to
Kind of-
convey a certain message, or is it just kind of like just to break down the conventions in general, the conventions of maybe the art world?
A lot of the time it's just to break down the conventions, because you don't know what can be behind there without breaking them down in the first place.
True. What creativity could spawn from, let's say, a surrealist artist, a first generation of surrealist artists. Yeah, that's very true.
And a lot of surrealism too was, trying to take out that, like I said, like the logical, trying to plan stuff out ahead of time. Like they had exercises where they're just trying to be creative without using their brain. Because when you use brain, you use logic, you have interpretations, you have the subconscious. They're trying to separate from all of that. So like a lot of the exercises that they would do is trying to draw something blindfolded. Or, I'll have a piece of paper, I'll draw something, I'll pass it to you, Chase. You're not looking at what I drew. You have to add
Okay.
to it. And we go down the line, and we
Yeah.
suddenly have this misfigured creature that looks like a combination of like 10 different animals, and bam, you have surrealism in a lot of ways.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Almost like wonder what they're responding to. I don't know if it was them or if it was the Dadaists that was responding to the world wars, in which
So surrealism was a bit
surrealism-
after.
right?
Mhm.
Okay, Dada came first, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. But yeah, it definitely kind of makes me like, how did they get intrigued by this? I guess because a lot of the work that I produce, there is something I want to talk about.
Mhm.
And I find myself using aspects of other art movements to incorporate an expression or feeling. So sometimes I will
Mhm.
add aspects of surrealism.
I mean, some could say it's escapism, almost like escaping from the reality of like
Yeah.
we just got out of World War I at that point.
Yeah.
Not a good time to be.
Yeah.
So I guess you could say,
I'm kind of questioning how the whole world got into that war. And then
Mhm.
also, as we know, at the following years, how that could even happen too, again, back to back.
Right.
So,
Cool.
yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much for joining me. That's all I have for today. That's the end of my notes. And we are right at the time to
Sweet.
wrap this up. So thank you both so much for joining me. Thanks, Chase, for always coming on.
Thank you.
And welcome, Dan, for the first
Thank
time.
you.
I hope
Thank
you
you
had
for
some
having
fun.
me.
I personally loved this conversation. I really enjoyed it. I feel like we
Sweet.
really explored some interesting points of art history.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Same.
So thank you both again. Thank you to everyone watching. I hope you guys enjoyed it too. If you guys made it this far, if you did, please make sure to like and subscribe. We do have more episodes coming up soon. So please do stay tuned for that. And I hope everyone has a great day. All right, bye everyone.
Bye.